I want you all to look outside the windows and notice the snowflakes that are falling down. Because usually when we read this passage, it's Christmas time. And so it takes a different mindset to think about this story that we associate with Christmas so strongly. And think about it in June when it's 85 degrees and the air conditioning's running. It's a little different. We're talking about rest. Our memory verse, Gina, if you could put it up, reminds us about rest. Let's read it together. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Okay, Gina, you can take it down now. Can anybody tell me the first line? I'm not going to call on Gail unless nobody else can try it. Come to me, all ye who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Great. And we'll stop there. Keep working on it. For me, I don't memorize well, and I keep it in my Bible. I open up my Bible, and I see it, and I read through it. And it's getting a lot more familiar. But it's not quite living inside of me. The last couple of days at Indiana-Michigan Mennonite Conference, my sister Carla was one of the main speakers, and she has memorized a number of passages in the Bible, one of them being the Emmaus Road, which was the main scripture. And she has it memorized. It is a part of her. It comes out of her. And that's my hope with our verse from Matthew, that it will become a part of us so that when we think about rest and when we look at the yoke, it's those words that will come to our minds and to our hearts. Where is your favorite place to rest? Where is your favorite place to rest? A chair. I don't care. On the kitchen floor. Ooh, unique. In bed, of course. In bed. On the sofa. Oh, on the floor in front of me getting a head massage. On your porch. Anywhere in Florida. And you know, Brad, you're right on, because that's what I want to talk about today, is that rest is often a place. Any place? Where else do you rest? The lake. Yeah. By the pond. In the woods. Yeah. With your family, and that's another thing that I think is significant about rest. It's not always, okay, sometimes rest with family doesn't work, right, Joel? Oh, that was him. They're cousins, you know, so do one of you want to move to the back or something? But rest is place, but rest is also people. And those are the two ideas that came to me as I read with new eyes the story of Mary and Joseph headed to Bethlehem. No, they weren't going to Florida. Although they did go to Egypt a little later on. That's close to Florida, right? I had to remember the opening time when Nathan brought his big lawn chair in here. And I know a year ago when we had our camping at Steve and Sherry's house, I sat in that chair, and it's big. Big tall back, big cup holder. So I think of that chair as a place to rest, added to all of the things that you have already said. Over the last weeks, we've talked about rest. Rest as being a part of God's promises. We understand what God promises us, and when we know that, we rest and are comfortable in that. Rest is when we listen well to God. And in many ways today, Mary and Joseph have listened well to God, and they rest in that. Rest is also when we confess our burdens. When we realize that we're carrying a lot of stuff, and last Sunday I invited you to write that on a piece of paper, and you came up, and Sharon and I offered forgiveness by tearing up those things and allowing God to share those burdens. For me, rest is a blue chair in the living room or my bed. It's like you can have all kinds of guests and people and activity in the house, but just give me that little spot that I can lay down on and I can rest. In the fall, when we go camping with our overseas friends, I find that a restful time. And as I thought about it, I realized that it's the people, because I'm comfortable with them. There's nothing they don't know about me, so there's nothing to hide, and it's mutual. But another difference I realized was that when we go camping with them, we usually drive 6, 7, 8 hours. And that drive is a time to start thinking about rest. And it reminds me of sometimes going on vacation, and when you get home, you say, now I need another week of vacation to recover from vacation. So sometimes rest is preparing for that. And I find that when we camp with our friends. We go to a place, we get the tent set up, there's a fire, and you can just sit and watch the fire burn. Watch the darkness come. Watch the sun come up in the morning. Rest. Mary and Joseph are certainly a young couple who need a bit of rest. Together, they have worked through the traumatic news that Mary is pregnant. And even more so in their society, that news and being unwed brought a tremendous stigma on them. And only by God's intervention did Joseph stay with Mary. So this young couple has already had to face that kind of public ridicule, scandal. What's another word I want to use? Looking down. It's really a lot for a young couple. And if that wasn't enough, now comes the decree from the Roman government that it's time for a census. A counting of all the people. Would you want to travel when you're almost ready to give birth, women? And you're traveling thinking of a car with cushions. And here's Mary probably walking or riding on a donkey at best. And the trip from Nazareth down to Bethlehem is about 80 miles. 3 days of travel. So already you have Mary and Joseph stressed by the burden, and now this governmental decree requiring them to go back to the home of their ancestral origin. And for them, both of them, this was their ancestral origin. There were no superhighways. There were no rest stops. They had to carry with them everything that they needed. Certainly, Mary and Joseph have wanted to read Matthew 11:28 to 30. If anybody was in need of rest, it was Mary and Joseph. We know a little bit more about this census. You see, Egypt was also a protectorate of the Roman government. And in the Egyptian sands, archaeologists have found clay jars with reams and reams of scrolls inside that were the results of the census in Egypt. And so we assume that what the Roman government did in Egypt, they also did in Judea and Samaria. Every 14 years, the Roman government wanted to know who was there. They wanted to know that so that they could tax you. There was a poll tax. I'm not sure about men, I didn't find that. But women, once you were 12 years old, you had to pay a tax. So the government wanted to know who's there and how much money we should be expecting. And they also wanted to know who was there so they could conscript you into the Roman army. Jews, however, were exempt. So every 14 years, the decree went out. And in case you haven't noticed, there were no exemptions. Because certainly if there would have been someone who could have been exempt of traveling back to their hometown, it would have been a young woman pregnant with her first child. But Pax Romana had no space for exemptions. The Roman government decreed it, and you went. With so many coming to Bethlehem, the byways and the highways would have been full, not to mention the lodging establishments. So it's really no surprise that tired Mary and Joseph conclude their journey in some kind of a livestock enclosure. Some speculate that maybe it was a cave. For myself, I think of the places in East Africa where they kept the animals at night. The Maasai would take big thorn bushes with big thorns on them. They would cut them and stack them about this high and make a big enclosure. And then at night, all of the animals would go in there, and the shepherds and herdsmen would know that they were safe from any of the hyenas or lions. And then in the morning, you would take a part of it down, and they would come out. And so I imagine that Mary and Joseph are in some kind of a place where the animals are kept and the people. Another author described it as perhaps kind of lean-tos in a large circle, and a place in the middle where the livestock would lay. A fire in front of each lean-to for the families to cook. And Mary and Joseph probably didn't have a spot in the lean-to. They were just out here in the middle. But nevertheless, the place they arrived at was a place of safety. A little bit of shelter from the travel that they had been on. A place where they could get water. And they could rest. For them, rest was any shelter, even a pile of straw. In these last days, 6 of us from Olive attended Indiana, Michigan Mennonite Conference. And I found rest there. Not completely, but there were places that I found rest. I didn't get any extra naps or really any extra sleep. But Amigo Center is a beautiful place on the edge of a lake with the varied woods around and beautiful trails to walk through. So that first evening, I remembered there was a gazebo down by the water's edge, and I made my way down there. I had to fight through some Canadian geese who didn't like me. But once I got there, I could sit and look out over Lake Perrin. The sun was behind me, and I could see the glow of the evening and the calm of the water. I felt rest. I found rest in worship these last days, in singing with 160 people as we heard about the story of Jesus meeting the two disciples on the road to a town called Emmaus. I found rest as I heard from different congregations the things that they are doing, places where God has shown up in their congregational life. I didn't know that Holdeman Mennonite is involved with people who have gotten out of prison. And Pastor Randy Detweiler talked about the good stuff and the hard stuff of walking with two individuals who have been incarcerated and have come out and who are part of their congregation. I knew that North Main Street Mennonite had a garden, but was surprised to hear that last year they gave away 3,000 pounds of produce. And was intrigued that some of the questions they get of, you mean you grow this to give it away? There were new friends. For me, Robert and Earlene Hunt, who shepherd a small congregation on the south side of Elkhart, who have a special calling to people who are addicted, who don't have their own meeting space and struggle to kind of know where they want to meet with their small congregation. And yet they are firmly centered on Jesus. I had the privilege of introducing them. And Robert, of course, was ready to speak, and I told Earlene, well, you need to talk too. No, I won't talk. Well, then, when Robert was done, Earlene said, okay. She stepped up to the podium. Whoa, doggy. She knows how to preach. I think she surprised herself and blessed the rest of us by giving testimony to what it means to be a faithful wife and a faithful follower of Jesus in a community that is often torn apart by drugs and alcohol and broken marriages and all kinds of stuff. I found rest in learning to know Robert and Earlene. And by the way, their service is at 1 o'clock, so he keeps telling me he's going to come here some Sunday morning. So if Robert ever shows up, you'll recognize him. He's truly a gentleman. He's about 6'4" or 5. And in the autumn of his life. It gave my soul rest to find others who also follow Jesus on the way. Mary and Joseph found rest in a stable, a place. But people also provide rest for us. As the Christ child was born, Luke records both a heavenly response and an earthly response. When John the Baptist was born, Zechariah responded by singing. Here, it's the heavenly hosts that are singing. We've had thunderstorms in these last days, and I cower at the immensity of those dark clouds, and when the lightning starts flashing, I'm looking for a building. And by the way, you know there was a guy struck by lightning in Elkhart. You know where he went for shelter? Under a tree. Lesson, don't go under a tree when it's lightning. The angels came to celebrate the birth of Jesus. The heavenly hosts. And I can only imagine that and compare it to the thunderstorms that roll through our community in these days. Those thunderstorms are fearful. All the more so for these shepherds in celebration of this young king who is coming to be Lord and Savior of the world. And I can only imagine that in that place where they were finding shelter with other families and animals around, that they too came to see this newborn son, probably not understanding the significance. But who of us are not drawn to the newborn babies that come into our midst? We want to go and have a little peek at that new face and the tiny hands and feet. The birth of the baby child is celebrated by the heavenly hosts and by the people that surround them. The simple shepherds out in the field also come. The really strict religious Jews didn't like shepherds. You see, the shepherds, when they were out in the field, they couldn't do all of the ceremonial washing things that the good Jews would have wanted to do. And so they were looked down upon, even though it's likely that these shepherds were caring for a flock of sheep that were being kept to sacrifice in the temple. Sheep that were perfect for sacrifice. Is there rest for you when you come here to this place of worship? When you walk in the doors here on Sunday morning and when you get ready to come here, are you coming anticipating that this will be a place of rest? Are you coming here anticipating that God is going to show up, and as God is here in our midst, that you will know rest? And I think most of the times we can answer yes. I come here to rest. To be in the presence of fellow brothers and sisters, to be with my friends, my family. But I know that there are also times when there is unrest. And I think the Spirit of God calls us to constantly think about how do we make this a place of rest. A place that is safe for all people. A place where everyone is welcome. A place where our little ones can have fun and know that they are accepted. Sewing this week, Laura had Luke here. And I'm starting to realize that he and some of the other little ones know my name. And by my design, know that there are tractors up there. And so Luke enjoyed playing with the tractors and the blocks, and I'd build towers and he'd knock them down. Why do kids do that anyway? You build this nice tower and you're admiring it, and they knock it down. Oh, it's developmental. Thanks. I'll remember that the next time my nice tower gets knocked down. But that interaction is a sign of rest. That this place and we as God's people have welcomed others to come and find rest here. Rest in fellowship. Rest in reminding people that Jesus is the way. And that's really my hope, too, on Saturday night when we have an ice cream machine out here. And our neighbors and friends come. We invite them to rest. That we invite them to come and spend a little bit of time with God's people and rest. And if the first ice cream dish doesn't do it, then they can have the second one. But more than the ice cream, I hope that it is our interaction with those who come. That we can mirror the light of Christ. That we can engage them in conversation, hear about their lives, and offer God's touch of hope. That's why we have an ice cream social. so that in the same way that Joseph and Mary found rest in the stable in Bethlehem, as friends and neighbors come here, they will find rest with us. In 1982, I graduated from Heston College. That's in Kansas. It's about 800 miles away. And being young and adventuresome, I decided I would ride my motorcycle home from Heston. Now, that's not such a big thing. Mike's already laughing because he knows all about this. But I had a Honda XL 175, which most people would consider unworthy to make any kind of a trip like that. But I thought, why not? It's a single-cylinder motorcycle, probably about like 10 horsepower. Top speed, maybe 65 miles an hour. Had turn signals, lights, and everything. More horsepower than that? More like 15, 20? More horsepower than that. So the first leg, we graduated on Sunday afternoon, and I rode from Heston to Garden City, Missouri, where Grandma was, Grandma Yoder. And I rode that section with Honda 750. Blackhawk? No, Goldwing. Honda 750 Goldwing. Harry Hartzler. Cousins to the Smiths up here. I rode my cycle, and he rode beside me. And his comment was, I didn't think you could keep up with me. Stayed with Grandma that first night. Then the next day, I headed north on 2-lane highways up into Iowa, and I rode all across the state of Iowa. And to add insult to injury, I went through 2 thunderstorms. I didn't have rain gear on. At the edge of the Iowa-Illinois border was my roommate's farm, and that's where I was headed. The last stop before I got there, I filled up with gas. I could go about 100 miles before I needed gas. I kicked my Kickstarter, and the thing fell off. Heck, oh no, now what do I do? So I remember picking up the Kickstarter, putting it back on the luggage rack and strapping it on. And then I thought, well, if I put it in about 3rd gear and run down the ramp and pop the clutch, maybe it'll start. And it did. Great. Off I went. I stopped at my friend's house, my roommate's house that night. And then the next morning was the final stretch home. I didn't really want to go clear south of Chicago, but I didn't have a whole lot of choice. I'd been staying off of 4-lane highways, but suddenly I was on 4- and 6-lane highways, big semis and this kind of thing, but I did okay. I had enough speed and power. I could navigate. And I'm getting close to home. I get off of 94 onto 2 that turns into 20. And somewhere in there, it starts raining again. And for the last hour home, it rained. Oh, did it feel so good to drive up the lane to Mom and Dad's house. To be home. To be to that place of rest. To be welcomed by my mom, who did not give me a hug because I was totally sopping wet. Rest is about people. Rest is about place. That's what Mary and Joseph experienced. And that's what the Spirit of God calls us to be at Olive Mennonite Church. A place of rest because we offer Jesus. And a place of rest because we are